Okay, is everyone good? I'd like to thank everyone for being here, but we have a very important matter of United States federal government issues to discuss. And the resolution today is the United States federal government should significantly increase electronic surveillance of European nations. The way and mechanism or how you're going to evaluate this round is going to be through a veil of pragmatism, or what is most practical for all nations involved. So a little bit of resolutional analysis. United States federal government is obviously going to be like the United States actors. Specifically, we're going to be looking at congressional action in this round, but should significantly increase, which is going to be to increase the level of what we're doing now, electronic surveillance, which we're actually going to be looking specifically at drones of European nations, which we can look at Western and Eastern European nations, like anyone. So the first contention is that the United States federal government should utilize drones to increase surveillance. Congress can do this best. The Mason School of Law 2014 specifically cites that Congress has the overhaul and the recognition and expertise on drones already to make sure that this is done effectively, especially overseas. This also can be seen through the Consumer Drone Safety Act cited from Forbes 2016. What you can actually see, Judge, is that Congress already knows what they're doing with drones, and so regulation via Congress is actually going to be most net beneficial. Second contention is that the plan is going to solve for privacy concerns. It's going to mandate interagency cooperation. It's going to clarify responsibility and permissible use. So basically, by using Congress to do this via European nations, what we're actually accessing is that everything is going to be done correctly and effectively. Contention 3 is that protection from European nations is needed, like the plan is going to solve. This is from the George Washington Law Review 2013. There are many European nations in the status quo that are actually proving that we need to be watching them specifically. We're going to get to why in the next two advantages. So contention 4 is actually going to be terrorism. Subpoint A is that unmonitored surveillance is going to exacerbate the harms that we're trying to mitigate. This is the ACLU Massachusetts Law Review 2013. What we can see is that there are actually going to be a lot of terror organizations that are moving across into European nations, specifically ISIL and even Al-Qaeda is starting to make their move to different European nations. Subpoint B is that terrorism causes extinction. This is the Lawfare Research Paper 2013. What we can see is that if we're not watching terrorism close enough, it's going to actually grow. And once it grows, that's going to inherently be the problem. Then subpoint C is that extinction is the greatest impact in the round. So practically, if we're mitigating extinction, then you vote F. What you can see is that if terrorism starts, then it's going to increase to a large scale. And if it large scale increases, then the actuality is that we can lead to extinction. So then, go to contention 5, which is going to be dehumanization. Subpoint A is that a state without surveillance is going to usher in totalitarian precedents. This is the New England Journal on Criminality and Civic Actions. This is 2013. What you can specifically see is that if no one's paying attention to what a state does, or in this case, like a nation state, what they're doing, then they have the opportunity to do whatever they want to do. And insofar as that is true, that is going to actually usher in this opportunity for totalitarian regime to begin. And once totalitarian regime begins, then there's going to be massive dehumanization and human rights violations. This can be clearly seen through several different European nations. We can specifically look at Cyprus as a very good example. And subpoint B is that dehumanization justifies the worst kind of atrocities. This is also the New England Journal of 2013. Again, we can look at Cyprus. What happened was nobody was watching them and they started killing off and unjustifiably jailing people because they just felt like it. We have to be monitoring these countries. And then contention 6 is that federal action is going to be key. Nation states are inconsistent. This is the truthout.com 2014. What you can see is that once the United States federal government engages, then we have the opportunity to make the most solvency. And once we can effectively solve it in one nation, then we can create this spillover effect. So the round breaks down really simply. Since what we want to do is operate under a pragmatic view, or what is most practical, we need to allow for Congress to implement the drones, and so that we can protect people from the United States, the European nations, via terrorism and dehumanization. So you affirm. Open for cross-sections.
Okay. Judge, you ready over there?
Yeah.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions for you today. So whenever you get to your definitions, you're getting in, so we're gonna be talking about drones and specifically surveillance drones, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're looking at surveillance drones. So you're saying that surveillance drones are gonna solve for stopping terrorism?
Yes, because what we can do is specifically like ACLU Massachusetts does a really good job of showing us that if we aren't monitoring it, then we don't know what's
Okay,
going on.
So where are they gonna monitor? Where are they gonna monitor at? Which, in European countries, like?
I mean, like if do you want me to defend a specific country?
Well, I was just curious of like, I mean, we already have monitoring set up, like, so.
Okay, but
we're
it's
gonna use the US to
ineffective
do more.
because it's not mobile.
Okay, so why does the US have to be the one to do this? If this is a European country, why
Because
can't?
we can specifically look at, that's the contention one, showing you that Congress already has expertise in drones, we can
Is
specifically.
this what Europe wants?
Europe wants no terrorism and no dehumanization.
So
Sure.
Europe wants the US to come help them.
United States has an obligation to intervene when we see a fit.
Okay, so we have the right to kind of just go and intervene wherever the terrorists are?
Well, it's kind of
makes
what
it
we
our
do
right,
already,
kind
so sure.
Okay, so the US is the one, so if it passes through US Congress House, then the US should act and do this without regards to the EU, even though the EU has certain drone
EU
things, or
EU's
certain
in
drone laws?
EU's ineffective when it comes to drone use and drone regulation because the EU, or specific, like, it's actually the UN that has all these laws, by the way, but the UN and EU both, like, we use them interchangeably for discussion's sake, they don't have the effective, like, regulations because they don't have expertise in drones. Whereas the US Congress has this all implemented already, all we have to
Okay.
do is change the Consumer Drone Safety Act to apply to international
Okay,
mandates.
that's one thing.
Another pen.
All right, Judge, are you ready? Are you ready? All right, Judge, thank you for being here and judging this round opponent. This is my first time hitting you. This is going to be great. I'm really looking forward to getting into it. So, Judge, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go over some resolution analysis. I'm going to read the resolution to you as it is right now. The USFG should significantly increase electronic surveillance of European nations. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of breakdown real quick. With the electronic surveillance in particular, whenever I looked up the definitions, I found observing or listening to persons, places, or activities, usually in a secretive manner, most commonly known through wiretapping, bugging, videotaping. She used it to define it as drones, so we're going to say that drones are going to be the ones using either these videotaping or, doing surveillance. So that's what I'm going to let stand for today's round. I agree with how she did it, but that's how I see it should be defined. So going into her case, actually, I'm going to start with going down some things that she said and then kind of hit back with my contention cases later. So first I want to address, whenever she's talking about using these drones, she's saying that the U.S. should vote it through Congress and should then take these drones and place them in European nations to try to help solve for terrorism. First off, she doesn't know if she doesn't have anything saying that Europe is coming to the U.S. trying to get the drones over here. Europe isn't wanting the U.S. to come in and start surveying them. I'll get more into that in my own case. Whenever we have, she says that Congress knows the primary concerns, and Congress is for us, is for America, and Congress doesn't make decisions for Europe. And Europe has their own drone federation, has their own drone people that monitor Europe. And the U.S. does not need to take this role. They do not need to significantly increase because we already have drones monitoring the U.S. So significantly increasing this is not what we need to do. She's trying to say that this is going to solve for terrorism, that just watching and monitoring is going to stop terrorists, which that is not the case, because if that was the case, don't you think that we'd have already had thousands and thousands of drones watching everything? But we don't, because you can't adequately do that. You can't just put drones up everywhere because people don't want to be watched. They don't want this big brother type thing over them. And so going into really into my case, what I want to kind of get at, first off, to really understand what drone surveillance can look like, imagine what would have happened if they were to try to pass this here. Imagine what surveillance would look like here. It already breaks the Fourth Amendment right. because the Fourth Amendment is the search of seizures and warrants, and that's breaking that right here. Americans here wouldn't even stand for that, so they're trying to go over to Europe to do that. That wouldn't work. And if they do that, then they're not going to stop terrorists by just watching them. They're going to stop them by actually doing something. This can actually, for a second subcontinent, this can actually stir problems with the EU, because if we just have drones all over there, then they don't want these drones. That they can actually have problems because the U.S. can use these drones. Because remember, the U.S. could use these drones just to try to surveillance for themselves, to gather data for themselves, not necessarily potent toward or aimed towards terrorism. And it can actually be used for a lot of other things. So first of all, this has to be applicable, and there has to actually be a bigger purpose, and that this throwing drones at this will not actually solve this purpose. So I kind of want to just take the electrical surveillance and kind of have you look at it, and whenever she's using drones for this, for taking the act of observing or listening to or watching, what is observing and listening to and watching going to really solve? They have to know where to put them. They have to know where certain groups are. And with terrorists, the reason why terrorists are so hard are because they're found in churches. They're found in small things on the ground. They're found not by something you can look at miles up in the air. They're not something, drones aren't going to be able to permeate what she's trying to solve for. Drones are not the effective tool to do this. And so U.S. significantly increasing for that doesn't make any sense there. It doesn't really fit. European nations aren't going to allow the U.S. to just start posting drones everywhere. Europe already has their own amount of measures. Like here we have the FAA, and in Europe they have something like they have something similar. You know, the FAA, the Federal Aviation. I can't remember exactly how it branches out, but it's who controls the airways and the air traffic and stuff. And there's certain rules over there and certain laws that they already have in place that this could violate, and that could put us in bad terms with our allies. So with that, I am out of time, and I'll stand down for my cross-examination. Thank you.
Okay, is everyone good? So what's the status of European drone regulation right now?
As far as European drones?
Yeah, you said that.
Well, Europe is actually a little bit farther than we are here in the U.S. They're actually going to start trying to use, as far as drones go, they're going to start trying to manipulate them to use in commercial uses and actually use around.
Okay, that doesn't answer the question. What is the status of drone regulation? What can
I don't know how to answer that without giving regulations to you. But.
Okay, sounds good. So let's go over the neg flow real fast. You two contentions, right? Imagine drones in the U.S. and it causes issues with the EU, right?
Well, yeah, and under that, I have how your case is solved with the terrorism.
Okay, so when the apps, what's practical about the neg?
What do you mean?
Like specifically, why is
Why we shouldn't significantly
Sure.
increase? We shouldn't significantly increase because we're not the outlets to be surveilling Europe.
Okay, where in the 1NC do you provide evidence to where that isn't effective?
What do you mean?
Like the 1AC provides solvency, right?
Okay.
So what would, actually no, let's go down. You say that Congress shouldn't make international mandates, right?
Okay.
Why?
Well, I was trying to say there for, in specific, at a context for the drones. And that I was
I know,
saying that they
why?
shouldn't, that the U.S. doesn't have the grounds to make rules for what's going to happen in the EU.
Okay, why?
Because the Congress only affects America. It's only supposed to make America's affairs.
Okay, but why?
That's not what it's set up as Congress.
Just because it is, that's why, right? Okay, that's good. No further questions. Okay, is everyone good? Wow, this has been a really interesting round, but it's going to be a really quick speech, so we're going to go ahead and jump in. First, we're going to start on the app flow. Specifically, let's look at the weighing mechanism. It's what's going to be most practical. The most practical thing here, Judge, is to get rid of terrorism and get rid of dehumanization. The only way we can do this is if we can pinpoint it first. This is going to be really important when we look at the contention 4 and 5 on the app flow. I'm showing you that unmonitored surveillance is going to exacerbate the harms that we have in the status quo. Terrorism causes extinction, and extinction is the greatest impact. What Sean specifically says is that drones aren't going to solve terrorism, but we have to first see where the issue is before we can stop it. But even if you don't buy that, you can look at the second impact, which is going to be the contention 5, dehumanization. I'm showing you right here that a state that isn't monitored is going to take advantage of the monitoring, so then they're going to commit human rights abuses. Those are two very clear impacts coming out of the 1AC. Then, even if you don't buy that, like, this is important, look at the contention 6. The truth out analysis has gone conceded in the 1NC. This is going to be very important because this is solvency. Shows you that U.S. federal action is going to be key to solving these two problems because European states are inefficient and inconsistent in their drone application. Sean specifically concedes this piece of analysis, and once that is true, the neg has no ground to say that it's not going to happen. The 1NC provides no solvency deficits, and once no solvency deficits are provided, you have to vote app. But even if you don't buy that, go ahead and go on to the neg flow. First contention is that you imagine drones in the United States and that it breaks the 4th Amendment and it doesn't stop by watching. But cross-apply the contention 1 that specifically says that Congress is already having the expertise with drone use in the status quo. That's the Consumer Drone Safety Act. What this is showing you right here is that we do use drones in the status quo and we do use them for surveillance. That's a non-unique argument, and it's actually going to impact turn the 1NC. Then go to contention 2, talking about how it's going to cause issues with the EU and drones don't solve the impacts of the AC. Here's the problem. Again, you can cross-apply the contention 6 that is going to be specific solvency. Don't let Sean get up here in the next speech and tell you that he does talk about the contention 6, because that's inherently not true. He says that the app can't solve and then drop solvency. That's a game over issue, Judge. So the round breaks down really simply. Sean says that Congress should be making these international mandates, but the contention 6 shows you why we should be doing that. Practically, we have the obligation to pinpoint and target terrorism and dehumanization. So once that happens, what we need to look at is the fact that Sean says that the app doesn't say that, like, European nations want it, but the European nations want to stop things like terrorism, and we need to be mitigating dehumanization. What they don't want will help them because we'll be stopping terrorism and dehumanization. The AC shows you solvency. Don't let him talk about that in the next speech. So you affirm.
Who's your 3-minute, right?
Mm-hmm.
Judge, ready?
Yeah.
Alrighty.
Mm-hmm.
Alright, so I kind of want to talk about what the app is doing with her solving for how she's saying drones are what's solving for terrorism. Well, these drones are not going to solve for stopping terrorism, because the way these terrorist organizations are working are on the ground and are through religious means, and drones are not the right equipment to discern which people are terrorists versus which people are not. They're not the equipment to discern who needs to be, or who is a terrorist, just who is a terrorist and who isn't. The drone is not the right equipment for that. She says Congress is an expert at drones, and I highly doubt that Congress is an expert at drones, because most of them use a computer from the 1990s. I mean, I'm pretty sure they don't know a lot about anything very electronically advanced. Where she says that this was solving for human rights, and drones don't do anything for drones aren't, these surveillance drones, keep in mind, these are drones that only are allowed to really videotape. That is really all they're allowed to do for being a surveillance drone, is just videotape different areas. They don't solve, like she's trying to make them sound like they are, like they're big pretty packages. It's not like you can just throw drones out there and like, oh boom, terrorists are gone now, we have these drones. No, that's not how it works. We've been using drones for a very, very long time. And Congress is not the right outlet for handling problems for Europe. Europe is doing this and using their own drones and using their own means. We do not need the U.S. to be this outlet to go into Europe. The U.S. needs to be in its own state of affairs right now. Europe is able to take care of this themselves. Going back into more of my case. So what I really want to hamper on during this time is whenever we look at going back again to the resolution, the USFG should significantly increase electronic surveillance of European nations. What's really something that should be big here is that with the electronic surveillance and the definition that I did provide you, I said it earlier, was the observing or listening to the persons, places, or activities, usually in a secretive manner, most common wiretapping, bugging, or videotaping. If we have these drones out everywhere in a secretive manner all over Europe, Europe isn't going to want US to have drones just surveillancing them. Like I was saying in my first contention, imagine if it was here. Because people in Europe live like people, like we do here, like they're people. We don't want drones surveillancing all of us, not even for terrorist attacks. It took 9/11 to make major changes like this. We haven't had anything huge to cause for this big movement of needing to significantly increase drones for surveillance. Even us now, like even us Americans know that, we see that electronic surveillance can break the Fourth Amendment, and using these drones would break our Fourth Amendment. And just having our own Fourth Amendment truly pisses us off. So imagine how pissed off the Europeans will be if we start electronically surveillancing them for terrorism. Kind of like what, I think that started the NSA. So that is obviously not good. And with that, I'm out of time, so I stand down. Thank you.
Okay, is everyone good? Imagine a world where what happens is the right thing. That's the most practical world we can live in. And the only way that the 1AC shows you that we can do that is if we're going to significantly increase electronic surveillance of European nations using drones. So, here's a couple of things. First, Sean gets up in his last speech and says that he highly doubts that there's an expertise in Congress. One, that's a new argument. Two, you can look at the Consumer Drug Safety Act. Second, I didn't bring this up in my last speech because I was going to give Sean a chance to bring it up, but there's only been one person in this round that's talked about the weighing mechanism, and it's been the app. That's going to be a prior question. The most practical thing in this round to do is to mitigate the two impacts the 1AC provides. First is terrorism, and second is dehumanization. Sean gets up in his last speech and starts talking about how it's not going to solve dehumanization. Again, Judge, that's a new argument, but even if you don't buy that, what you need to be looking at is that it's going to solve. The argument that I made in the 1AR is that you have to see the issue before you can fix the issue. It's like seeing a staph infection start. If you don't see it, then you're never going to know you have to fix it. But first you have to see it to fix it. This is going to be very important. Then, let's look at voters. Voter number 1 is going to be the contention 6 on the affirmative. I'm showing you specifically the United States federal action is going to be key because European states are inconsistent with their drone applications. So, he says that the app doesn't say that Europe wants it, but what I'm showing you is that consistently we need to be doing it via the United States. Then the contention 1 specifically shows you that Congress is going to be the one that does it best. And insofar as Congress does it best, that's the most practical application of all of this. So what you have to look at specifically is that once I've shown you solvency through the 1AC that went conceded in the 1NC and the 2NR, you have to affirm. It's an easy act ballot if you want to look at things practically, so you affirm.